Um, I'm going to be speaking on the legal implication as it relates to specifically the repatriation or the restitution of these artifacts to Nigeria. I've had the opportunity to listen to quite a few number of debates as to who has the local standard or the right of ownership to these artifacts. I want to start by saying I'm not going to deal with the historical aspect of this discussion. I'm going to deal with the legal aspect of this discussion. That these artifacts and the bronzes, they tell a story of the tradition, the culture, the mode of spirituality of a particular people in Nigeria, and that is the Benin people. It wasn't a widespread that the United Kingdom of Benin was a sovereign nation when this incident occurred. And we had a sovereign monarch when this incident occurred. And that these artifacts were taken from a particular place when it occurred. So that the principle of restitution ad integrum or restitution in integrum provides that the owner must be brought to his original position as if this incident didn't occur in the first place. Now, the question then lies as to how do we restitute the original owner? Now, it is very clear, and we all now appreciate that these are Benin bronzes, and they were looted, or if I may use a more aggressive word, stolen from the palace of the Oba of Benin. And that the Oba of Benin do have a local standard as the sovereign or the majestic leader from the remotest antiquity to today to have a say, a conclusive say as to where these bronzes are repatriated to. I am not exempting the federal government because I've had discussion about, the generality of the relevance of these artifacts to Nigeria. I would say that has arisen as a result of the international debate surrounding these artifacts and that the fact that they're from Nigeria. I do accept that, but that it is known and recognized internationally that these artifacts were made by specialist craftsmen from the United Kingdom of Benin, and that they tell the traditional, the spiritual mode, the religious belief, the culture of the Benin people, not all the ethnic groups in Nigeria. So that the Oba of Benin has the local standard, the interest as regards the ownership of these artifacts. Now, like I stated earlier, I do not want to exclude the federal government. And I think federal institutions, state institutions should act as facilitators of these artifacts to the palace of the Oba of Benin. Some might say, well, I'm just being overwhelmingly too traditional and too personal about this. But that's the history of the Benin artifacts. That's the true history of the Benin artifacts. The legal law in respect of restitution applies as a general concept or a general narrative that the true owner of the artifacts must be identified and brought back to the original position. Now, as an earlier commentator mentioned, this idea of sharing, possession of the artifacts or borrowing, that shouldn't arise. The procedure of restitution or the procedure of reparation should be complete because I think the Benin people have suffered enough. The fact that these historical artifacts, I mean, you mentioned the amount of money some of them are being sought for. The amount of money they've been sold for, the relevance of these artifacts to the Benin Kingdom is quite enormous, particularly to the palace of the Oba of Benin. The citizens of Edo State who suffered, of the Benin Kingdom who suffered as a result of this. That is another aspect. Now, I have stated that the artifacts should be returned to the palace of the Oba of Benin. I'm also saying, as an alternative argument, that the facilitators should include the federal government. Not for the purpose of saying, well, we have a right to keep this, to facilitate the artifact to the original owner and to the original people. We are willing to, whatever we want to do about, sharing the viewing of the artifacts in the United Kingdom of Benin, we would go about doing that. So the question that I want to put to you is, what is the position of the British government or these other private individuals, if you are aware, as to where do they intend to return these artifacts to? We had questions about, where do you, Edo people, want us to return these artifacts to? Now, from the argument that I've advanced, which are strictly legal argument, where do you intend, considering that you have that knowledge as to where you got them from, where do you intend to return them to?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Well, I mean, I guess one thing you've got to make clear, and perhaps this is especially the case in Britain, but it applies to all the countries where there are Benin bronzes, but perhaps especially in Britain, that different institutions which hold different Benin bronzes, even within the museum sector itself, have very different constitutions, very different outlooks. So the way in which the British Museum is governed is very different to the way the University of Aberdeen Museum is governed, and it was able to act with much more autonomy. I mean, I can tell you from my conversations with some of the key individuals involved. I mean, Mark Walker, when he returned his Benin bronzes, I know it's one micro example, but I think symbolically it's an example. He was determined that they should go to the Oba's palace, which from where his grandfather stole them, and he did not want to give them to the federal government. He wanted to return them directly to the Oba's palace. That's one man. I know. I suppose if I was generalizing, I would say the museum, and I think the museum curators in Britain who are most in favor of restitution would be very concerned if the Oba and the palace were not going to be involved in some way in the process. If that answers your question, and they will, while they hold on to these objects, they will try, that gives them a degree of power and a bargaining position, and they will want to make sure that is the way in which they will be. That is what will happen to them before they give them back. But I've got to tell you as well that I've met private owners of Benin bronzes who will say, and dealers in Benin bronzes in Britain, and they will say, legally, we feel safe. Legally, our ownership is not in doubt, and that the arguments for restitution are ethical, they are moral, they are compelling in that regard, and those forces can be very powerful politically, as we're seeing, but they are not necessarily legal. Perhaps somebody like you can bring forward a challenge and make a test case, and then we have a precedent. And of course, laws do change over time, and we've seen, for example, with Nazi stolen loot, the British government stands on a pedal, says, oh, it can never change the British Museum Act, but lo and behold, they did in relation to Nazi stolen loot. And so laws do change. They lag behind ethical and moral changes, but they often do catch up. And in fact, if you talk to British Museum trustees, as I do in the book, and you say, well, look, what is the difference between Nazi loot and the loot of the Benin bronzes? They'll say things like, well, you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. Is that line 1900? Well, and they sound rather awkward as they come up with these reasons. And you say, well, 1897 is rather close to 1900. Or is that line, geographical? Is it a line that goes somewhere through the Mediterranean? Well, then people have to start justifying things in very uncomfortable ways to do with race and colonialism, which people aren't prepared to do, thankfully. So you feel ultimately the real weapon that the Edo people have is a moral and an ethical weapon at this moment. Perhaps the law will catch up and support them in the future, but I fear it's not there yet, if that helps answer the question.
Thank you very much.